The previous basket is under review.
Welcome back to Scout Team. We've got a national championship in the books. We took a week off. The Masters are in the books, which is my classic nap time. The portal has ruined my master snaps, Fawcett. That's no good. But we are back on the show. We're fired up. We've got a big offseason ahead. Lots of content. Also, lots of open slots. So if people have ideas, if people have people they want to hear from, different angles of the sport that they want explored more, please do let us know. It's been a fun first year doing the show as part of the Basket Under Review Network, and we certainly are excited for what an offseason might look like. So, Fawcett, I thought this would be a great first video to do postseason. Because I think one of the big stories of the sport over the last 2 years has been this massive emergence of teams playing bigger, teams playing 2 and 3 bigs on the floor, this stylistic shift in how the sport is played. And I think when you talk to coaches, you go into the portal and you figure out how teams are attacking things, you see just about everyone leaning into that style a little bit more, wanting to have more flexibility, wanting to have more size, wanting to, again, emulate what Florida did with Alex Condon and Ruben Chinyelu, what Michigan did with Yaxel Lendeborg and Morez Johnson and Ade Mara, what Arizona did with Owaka and Pete and Krivas and the like. And it does feel kind of across the country that like this too big trend is only just beginning. And I think we'll see more of that as the year goes on. We'll certainly talk about that as we go. But I thought we could frame this video, and I know you were excited about this idea of essentially a guide to playing 2 bigs, the benefits that a lot of these elite teams are experiencing, and then some of the drawbacks and things that people doing it for the first time might want to consider. So without further ado, I guess your big picture thoughts, and did you expect that things would go this direction this quickly in college basketball? And how have we gotten to where we are now, I guess is the best question.
Yeah, it's really interesting because when I started, really kind of like working within the coaching space and working with college teams about 6 years ago, that was still on the kind of tail end of the like pace and space. Everyone wanted to play 5 out. Everyone was trying to get very skilled at the 4, or it was just like get the best standstill shooter you can at the 4. And everyone still kind of like their traditional 5s, but it was like, just get the best standstill shooter you can at the 4, get as many guards as you can out there. Length is great, but play that way. And it was kind of interesting because it was actually kind of the lower end of the sport and the true mid-major that certainly didn't have multiple 7-footers, multiple athletic 6'10+ guys, but a lot of these teams at like the MAC level and the Horizon and the Sun Belt, they were the teams that had, maybe 6'9" at the center and a 6'7" at the 4, but a guy who was really like a back to the basket kind of guy. And like, because it was very difficult to get skill in the front court. That was the kind of thing. So you actually saw kind of 6 years ago ish, there was actually a lot of 2 big kind of ideas thrown out at the mid-major level of the sport, and then to see things totally kind of flip. And I feel like there's a feeling that you have when you go against these teams that just really overwhelm with size, that you don't really have the same level of helplessness with anything else. Like, yes, like playing a team that's really potent offensively when St. Louis is doing their thing, when like Nebraska was really hot to start the season, and like they're really tough to guard. Even when you could argue when UConn is winning their championships, like, yes, that's like a very, very difficult opponent to go against. It can feel very challenging to go against, but like there's nothing like the helplessness of just feeling like you are getting absolutely pounded on the inside and there's nothing you can do about it. And I think that feeling has scared a lot of coaches for a lot of years. And they have now like being like, hey, now that, or, if we have the resources, we want to play that style. And now if the top teams in multiple leagues are playing that style, well, how do you compete with that? So I find that really interesting. And I think the one thing I'm kind of monitoring as we move forward, and when we started the show 2 seasons ago, coming off UConn winning back-to-back championships, we had the conversation about like, hey, is everyone going to start slowing down, valuing the ball, running sets down every time down the floor, trying to do multiple layered offense, play slow, really make the defense work. We kind of thought like, hey, this is going to be a trend. And one of the reasons I thought it was going to be a trend was, yes, it's difficult to get players that are, like players have to learn how to play that way. They have to learn to make reads. They have to learn to remember all these sets. But at the same time, it was something that it didn't matter what level of the sport you were at. It, like you could be talking to a team in the SWAC, in the MAC, in the SEC. Everyone could kind of look at that style and say like, oh, there's a reason why this would be valuable. And I was like, that's why it's going to be a trend, because really everyone could take something from this UConn style. I don't feel the same way about Michigan and Arizona, being at the top of the sport playing this style, because it's really difficult to get those kind of athletes for most teams in the country. So it's kind of like a different trend in that way. Like 5-out overtook the country every level of the sport. We saw the 5-out kind of revolution. Will this be the same? Like, well, probably not, but it certainly looks like it's a trend at the top of the sport, both, and as we talk about it now, it's both like, well, the best teams are choosing to use their resources to build this way. And then every other conversation for teams that don't quite have the access to that level of size and athleticism in that position. Well, it's going to be a conversation of how do you beat that? How do you compete with that? So in kind of talking about like, okay, so you want to play big, I feel like we'll also identify some of the weaknesses teams have had and how you might see teams that don't have the size kind of countering it.
So I have some thoughts on that I think I'll save until after we do the film. Because I have a mid to mid plus example that maybe rebuffs a little bit of the thinking that, you have to have a ton of resources to play this way. But I'll talk about them at the end. Let's start offensively. I think this is probably where most of the questions are. I think most people relatively feel like, all right, if we're big and athletic, we'll be able to guard. I think the question is offensively, like, do we just get bogged down in the half court? Can we play functional offense if we don't have guys on the floor that are shooting at the 4? Like, what does that look like? And I think early in this season with Michigan, when we saw them struggle with Wake and struggle with TCU, that was like the big question. And the big critique point was, man, Michigan cannot score the basketball. This is ugly offense. This is terrible. Like, how could you play this way? This isn't going to work. And obviously that was proven to be very, very wrong. But I think that is the common refrain. It's like, all right, if you're going to be modern offensively, our 4s need to be able to make a shot. And if our 4s can't make shots, we're going to be in trouble. And I think there have been some things to fix that, but also some real struggles with that. So we'll dive into the film there.
Yeah, I mean, the number one trend, and we talked about it so much, is this kind of duck in. It's kind of the easiest offense you can possibly run. Gonzaga really popularized it, and really everyone's kind of using it, including Arizona, and Tommy Lloyd has used it ever since he left Gonzaga. But just this ability to put a guy on the block, put someone else into a high ball screen. There's your 2 front court players, and you play offensive line. And it kind of also brings in some interesting conversations about like the way the sport is officiated. And right now this is being allowed. And while this is being allowed, these are those plays that feel absolutely helpless to a defense. When you can time that duck in really well, it just seems like you're getting wide open layups from everywhere. And then the other thing I think that really good 2 big offenses are doing right now are using these post pins, fighting against some of the fronting that smaller players have to do, and really just leveraging those advantages you have size-wise. I think that is the big thing that the best teams at playing with 2 bigs are doing, is like, okay, they're not just out there to be designated offensive rebounders. Like, you need to make those smaller front courts feel you in some of those mismatches. And you can see a number of different ways that teams do it. Like Florida, like the more high-low action. Arizona, like the more like pick and roll to post. I really like what Michigan did here. Put your 4 on the wing, get them on an empty side, and just duck them in. So there are some advantages there to just like straight up bullying guys. But one of the downsides, kind of going back to that duck in ball screen, is if the timing isn't perfect, you are constantly playing pick and roll and throwing a help defender right into the face.
Oh my God, we got the Alvaro video back in play. Let's go.
Hey, and what caused the Alvaro video was really bad spacing by Florida that frustrated Alex Condon. And that's the thing with Condon, who was like all season long was constantly running into help defenders, because of the way that Florida spaced the floor. And then I also think you kind of saw this with some of the shot selection that eroded for like a Florida at times was some of these mid-range jump shots, which Todd Golden doesn't like. But when you start to see the way that they space the floor, if you see those situations where those duck-ins don't actually create a lane, it just turned into mid-range jump shots. Because where are they supposed to go? What did we talk about with Arizona so much this year? Okay, well, they settle for a lot of mid-range jump shots. I mean, watch these clips and just say like, okay, where are these drivers supposed to go? And I think that that's something that I really do think there is a lot of room for offenses to get much, much better with two bigs. And it's really interesting, Sweeney, because I often look at offense and I talk about modern offense, and I usually use that in the complimentary sense. And if I talk about something being old school, it might be derogatory. It's actually really interesting for me to go back to some of those like mid 2010 Bill Self teams. I almost wanted to show some film, didn't want this video to end up being an hour and a half, but like I look back at like some of those like Admiral Schofield, like Tennessee, Grant Williams, Tennessee teams. I go back and look at like Bill Self's teams in like 2013 or 2015. And I actually watch a lot of their two big stuff. And they were able to space the floor and flash guys in and out of the low post, flash guys in and out of the high post, base where the ball was. Like Roy Williams in North Carolina, these guys that like, whatever old school guys, like they were able to have really, really good spacing in the half court with two bigs. And I actually thought that a lot of these coaches should go back and watch a lot of it. I am not actually particularly impressed with a lot of the half court offense of a lot of the teams that are really at the top of it. And I feel like because they've got the offensive rebounding piece, they salvage their efficiency because of it. And hey, efficiency is efficiency no matter how you get it. So on one hand, you could just say like, hey, Fawcett, like doesn't matter. Efficiency is efficiency. But I still actually feel like we've got like another layer this stuff could go to, because once these teams actually do start playing much better stuff and they're just hammering everyone on the glass and dominating the interior defensively. Yeah. Like I feel like this two big stuff could get to another level. I actually feel like the offenses, even within kind of the three teams where we mostly talk about with the three big stuff with Michigan, with Arizona, with Florida. Yeah. Like there's still a lot of room for improvement, I think.
Yeah. So you may have seen me start grinning when you started talking about Bill Self and Roy Williams, because I was literally sitting there queuing up a point that I remembered like a year ago, us when we did the Kansas preview video, you showing like Landon Lucas duck-ins and like
right.
post pins, like that's like how they played. And then you think about Carolina and Roy Williams and like the Carolina break and how they ran and like the way they thought about running, the way that they built these offenses around pace and size and physicality. Like it was brilliant stuff. And I think it is cool to see like different eras of the game start to meld together in like obviously different unique ways, right? Like the thing I would say is like Florida is doing things a little bit differently than North Carolina did or Kansas does, but there's still a lot of like these elements that are still very, very present. And I think that's pretty cool. And I think you're right that there is a lot more upside offensively, especially again, when we're talking about like sort of unicorns, right? Like it's funny. The unicorn term was like the Porzingises and like these 7-footers that are like bombing in threes. And for a while it's like, man, like, wouldn't it be cool to have that guy? Like to me, Alex Condon is a unicorn. Like Alex Condon is 7 feet tall. He can dribble the ball on the perimeter. He had a bad shooting year, but like he is capable enough of like throwing in a three every so often. But like his skill and his feel and his ability to like drive it and play off 2 feet, like that's unique, right? That's really, really cool stuff. Or a Daimara is not shooting the basketball, but like the way that he can pass. Like I think there's this like, and it's going to take me a while to like meld all these points together here, but like you think back to like, oh, like every center wants to shoot threes. Every center wants to like, to me, like the idea of skill with the modern front court players, like, do they have enough feel? Do they know how to like space the floor properly? Do they know how to time some of these things? Again, like with Kondo, can you play in the handoff game? With Mara, can you pass a little bit? Like those are these like softer skills that modern bigs are developing. And certainly a lot of European bigs who've come over to college have had. That's like super impactful if you're going to play this way. That doesn't mean you have to be like throwing in threes. It doesn't mean you have to be a power forward instead of a center. So I think all that's really cool. And I think you're right that there is a lot more ceiling there, but I do think a lot of the reason to play big is about the floor. And we've talked about Houston's offense, maybe as the best example of this. you and I both agree Houston's offense is it's not pretty. They do some kind of grimy stuff. They take a lot of bad shots analytically, but they're always pretty much a top 20 offense because they offensive rebound. And I think that's a pretty good transition to, you think about all these elite teams right now. They're pretty much all offensive rebounding at an elite level. They're winning the possession game that way. And as long as they don't turn the basketball over, they're pretty much guaranteed elite offenses, whether they make shots or not. And then from there, you stack on top the shooting, which is what like 2025 Florida was able to do with Walter Clayton. I think that's you're really able to layer a lot of different elements to your team to continue to level up when you have this baseline of size and physicality. And I think that's one of the main sells for me as to why I would want to be trying to play big if I was a college basketball coach.
Yeah. So I think what's most interesting to me about these teams that are rebounding at a really high level. So, we've talked on this show about like tagging up and how a lot of teams are really using ways that they can get 5 guys on the glass while setting their defensive transition. It's really interesting to watch Michigan, Florida, Arizona. Like, they're not tagging up. They're not sending tons of guys on the glass. They're allowing their 2 front court players to really dominate, sometimes sending in a third towards the nail where some of those rebounds are going to spray out. But what's really interesting is like these teams are having their cake and eating it too. And by actually getting back in transition defense, if a lot of teams are not really good in their defensive rebounding, it also just like creates more space and makes it a 2-on-2 game every time the shot goes up. And if it's a 2-on-2 game and you've got more length at 2 positions, that's actually a lot easier than rebounding 5-on-5. And you can see on a lot of these plays, they're able to send just 2 guys to the glass. And then even if there is a rebound to the defense, they're just playing against a stacked floor. And it really reminds me about a lot of advancements in football, actually, where teams realized if they just put all their resources into a defensive line and you could create pressure with just 3 or 4 guys, it really opened up your defense everywhere else. That's kind of like college basketball now. You realize you can concentrate your resources into 2 guys and you no longer have to rebound with 4 or 5. So that's one thing that used to see teams that were really good at offensive rebounding. Like even looking back at like the Calipari Kentucky teams that really dominated the glass, they actually weren't great in transition defense because they were willing to give up, or they were, just put everyone on the glass. They're willing to give up in some in transition. However, all these teams we talk about today, they're really good in transition defense. Now, this is something that I actually think that everyone in the country should start to do, and Michigan does it. We saw a couple of these clips. Whenever someone shoots a jump shot, they just leak that guy out. And because they have so much size on the interior, they trust their ability to defensive rebound, and they just get countless of these just like wide open layups in transitions because they say like, oh, your guy shoots, you just move up the floor. Like this is something we have seen particularly in Spain. A couple of teams do this over in Europe, but like this is something that I actually think every single team should adapt. But especially if you feel good about your defensive rebounding because you're putting 2 bigs out there, you should be leaking out the shooter's defender every time. So Sweeney, I will make this prediction. If people like pick up on what Michigan did, which, we're putting some shine on it right now. I just think like even you could do this at a lot of levels and even just like roll the dice, even if you're not a great defense rebounding team. But this is my biggest thing to any team that's playing 2 bigs. Like trust those guys on the glass, let your guards leak out every single time, even leak out your center sometimes if he's contesting a jump shot, and you are going to steal free points every game. So this is one of my also like, I don't know if we're going to end up doing a like, let's predict the trends for next season, but this is going to be one of them. Any team that plays big, they're going to start leaking out their guards like this, and they're going to look to get these Hail Mary home run passes, gets guys streaking down the floor, and get easy points because of it. So in the like long list of ways that Michigan was able to get advantages, able to like win on the margins, like you're looking at it right here. I could have done 15 more clips like that.
Yeah, I mean, some of those passes from a die are insane. like on the like slung like this, 80 feet in the air into the breadbasket. Like that's pretty awesome. And again, it takes unique players, and Michigan certainly had that. But I think you're right. Like I think a lot of times people say, "Well, we could never do that because we're little old Youngstown State, or we're little old George Washington, or we're the little old Appalachian State. Like how could we? We don't have Yaxel Endeborg. We don't have a Daimara. Well, yeah, neither does the opponent, right? There aren't a lot of guys in the Sun Belt that look like a Daimara, and if they do, they're probably not very good. So I do think it's intriguing, without a doubt. I'm pretty bullish on that. But yeah, I love the point you made about the rebounding, and just not having to contribute so many numbers to be pretty good, to be much better in transition defense. Because, yeah, like I'm always impressed by Florida's guys, in particular their motor on the glass. Like you watch some of those clips, like they're up by 25, and like Logton is just like fighting his tail off. And I think, again, like this is where role definition and understanding like what you do that impacts winning is really valuable. Florida's done a great job, and I think a lot of these teams, we're talking about Florida, Arizona, Michigan, have done an incredible job of identifying pieces that like have slightly unique skill sets that are particularly well suited to play this type of style. And not every big is cut out for it, but Ruben Chinyelu, like that guy's perfect for it. I mean, Tobe Awaka is like one of the best rebounders in the country over the last decade. He's an incredible rebounder. Like it's a skill. And I think a lot of times we think about rebounding as simply an effort game, and it certainly is, but like there's a lot more that goes into it than just, we're going to like try really hard. And I think you see that certainly on film, both in terms of evaluation and then in terms of style and what it opens up as well. You mentioned transition defense. I wanted to ask you kind of big picture about defending with these two big lineups. I think there was some concern, at least, like, what happens if, the simple answer against Michigan all year was like, what if somebody has pick and pop fives? What can they? And like we did this, like, what if someone's big's just like throwing a bunch of threes? And like, yeah, there was a vulnerability to that. But like, what are some of the pros and cons defensively of being this big? And how have you seen them navigate that?
Yeah, and this is like a really interesting one, kind of relative to the fact that I do feel like at the college basketball, defenses are so ahead of offense. And that's why these teams that are playing really big that like might technically have vulnerabilities, like it's just difficult for a lot of college offenses to really take advantage of it. Now, this is the first possession of the national championship game where you could really see how UConn's really complex, really good offense. I just said a lot of college offenses are not very good. I do think UConn's is tremendous. People know that, but like even UConn's offense, like you can see with just like the switching that Michigan did, how it just like can negate all that. Now this is UConn. They were on the best offense. Like to see so much earlier where Michigan was just completely overwhelming all these teams by just switching everything. And I think too, this keeps your size at the rim, which is really big. And that's something we'll see in a lot of these clips as well, is like, it just makes sure that like your size looks like size, because what can happen to some teams if they're not able to do that and they get their size switched out on the perimeter, well, someone gets a drive and there's no rim protection and you can have bigs on the floor, but if they're caught chasing on the perimeter, well, like functionally you don't have size. You want that size at the rim, and you really see that Michigan does an incredible job of this. I think the teams that really have a lot more size will probably look at Michigan doing this and just like, Michigan has size and they always look like they have size because their size is where it needs to be. It's in the paint, and whenever there's a back cut, whenever there's a drive, there is someone with size ready to meet them. And I think kind of still one of the more predominant ways you're seeing teams that play really big is to drop everything. But I do think you see these drop pick and roll coverages look a little bit different. So like Arizona will still, like, even with the drop, guys are still really heavily in the gap, even those guards away from the ball, like they're protecting and they're looking big that way. They are just forming a wall with everything. Now with Florida, again, this is the kind of like NBA 6 or 7 years ago style of play of with the benefit of the drop coverage being that everyone else stays at home. So when you watch the three players not in the ball screen, they're not supporting the ball. They're not forming a wall. They're staying on shooters. And you saw that again, that's where Florida had good success, just not giving up a lot of 3-point attempts. And this is the other advantage of this one, is like, when you've got a big that's not involved in a spread ball screen, like don't put him in situations where he needs to commit to the ball and move his feet. Just have him kind of stay home. And when you look at teams that like the reason that in college basketball so many teams can play two bigs without it being a problem defensively is because no one puts these bigs into closeout situations. And you can see like that's the biggest problem. And you can see like there was times where like for Florida this was a problem when suddenly you have a 7-footer who's getting a piece of the paint, then he's rushing out to close out to a shooter. But like most college offenses aren't complex enough to do that. So yeah, I can find these clips where it's a challenge for some of these bigs to guard into space, but so many college offenses are not doing that. And you're still seeing where some teams want to have a stretch four out there, that position has kind of changed, but the easiest thing for a too big defense to guard is a team that's got a stretch four out there, because then you can just say, hey, don't leave the shooter. And that's really easy for a guy who's not particularly mobile. So, you did see, and that was a big thing that Iowa did. You saw the clips earlier. That was a big thing Iowa did to beat Florida, was like they put these bigs into long closeout situations. Even earlier in the season when Missouri beat the Gators, they put these bigs into long closeout situations. And that's something, again, you see in Europe. They do a really good job. Isolate that big on an open side and get a situation where a big has to come in and help in the paint. Then they have to close out to a shooter. And that's really hard for guys that are bigger. It's not that they're bad defenders. That's just that is where they start to look uncomfortable. And 2 years ago, when we started to see these teams building bigger, my thought was like, oh my goodness, that's going to be really tough once teams get these bigs into closeout situations. Suddenly they're going to look immobile, and that'll be a challenge. And then you just don't see it because these offenses don't put those guys into situations. So that is kind of my big thing to watch for the teams that are not able to necessarily build this way, or are in the SEC or in whatever leagues are going to have these teams that play big. Like, you need to structure your offense into positions where these teams that play too bigs are punished defensively for doing it. And I just didn't really see it. So that's where I thought it favored the teams that played big so much, because the biggest defensive liabilities were not made liabilities. And that's where, again, I think that offenses are probably going to have to change a little bit in the college game. And that's where the guys that are put at the four and they're shooters, and, or they're just purely pick and pop bigs. And we have those conversations like, oh, maybe, you pick and pop against these guys. Like, yeah, that can work a little bit for sure. But like, I feel like you need to put guys in those situations that can have to get a big into a closeout and attack that closeout and get the dominoes to fall from there. So I can talk about some of the defensive weaknesses for these teams in space, but like it was actually very rare this year for anyone to punish them for that. And that's why you saw Michigan win a championship, Arizona get really deep. And the one team that did it pretty well was Iowa. And that's where you saw, the Florida bow out early.
Right. And Iowa, and this is not to take anything away from Iowa. I thought Iowa had a great plan. Like, Iowa won in large part because they had a ton of Tavion Banks had that incredible stretch where he was just dribbling into the body of Alex Condon. And I think this is probably maybe an interesting thought experiment for the future of what is the best way to counteract size. I'm not convinced that it's shooting as much as it's strength. Like, Tavion Banks is just sort of a tank. And so he would drive into Kondo's body, and they were tough finishes. Like, at the end of the day, I think if you're if you were Florida, like you'd pause the screen and say, that was okay. Like, we lived with that. And I think it's a big endorsement for playing big, of just the fact that, like, at the end of the day, if you're long at the rim, it's going to be harder to do work. But I do think that if I was trying to build, and I think this is true whether I can get big or not, like, there are a lot of role players, both in college basketball and the NBA, and I imagine Europe, I don't watch as much European basketball as Fawcett, that like their biggest skill is like, man, that guy's just super strong. And I wonder if that's sort of the next frontier of like undervalued pieces. Is like, that guy's just sort of a tank. And like, it's not as important that he's super tall or super long or super athletic. It's just hard to move him. And I think guys who are hard to move are pretty valuable in the grand scheme of things. So I think it's absolutely fascinating what these teams have done. And I'd like to bring it back to the team that I said I wanted to mention. And I've thought a lot about this because I think we think a lot about playing big as being something that like really elevates these teams to become elite. And that the more I look at it and the more I study it, the more I sort of think that the opportunity to get big, even at low levels, even if you're not super talented, what it really does is it can like really raise your floor in a very meaningful way. And the example I will use is actually a Kyle Smith, Todd Golden disciple in Mike Magpio at Fordham in the Atlantic 10. Fordham has a bottom 3 budget in the A10. This was year 1 of a rebuild. And to illustrate to you where Fordham's overall talent level was entering this year, a person who went to practice texted me and said, I will be shocked if Fordham wins a single Atlantic 10 game. That person may have been being dramatic, but like that is how they felt walking. Like, my God, they are really bad. They have no talent. They have no players. So Fordham ended up winning 8 Atlantic 10 games. They went 8-10. They went 17-15 overall. And that's after losing opening night to NJIT and not being like overly competitive in that game. Yeah, like they had a successful season. And part of that is Magpie is a really smart coach. I give him a lot of credit. But I think there's something to be learned here. And if you look at their lineups, Fordham had a stable of bigs. They had 6'9", 240 Ricka Schulte and 6'10" Abbas Boja and 6'10" Akira Jacobs and 6'7" Ruhr Akuar. Sorry to Ruhr, whose name I'm definitely mispronouncing. But like Fordham was massive. And if you watched Fordham all year, you'd look like, man, like how do they have this much size on the court? And like, isn't it just ruining their offense? And like, they were an ugly basketball team to watch. Let's be very clear. They were 356 in three-point shooting. They shot 29% from there. They also didn't really get to the free throw line. They were 354th in free throw rate. They were 301st in effective field goal offense. They turned it over even a little bit too much for a team that's big. They were 218th in turnover rate. There's a lot of red on that sheet. But at the end of the day, what Fordham was very good at was they rebounded at a very high level. They were they were number 2 in the A10 in offensive rebound rate, number 1 in the A10 in defensive rebound rate. And they also were just annoying to score on at the rim. And I think there's a lot of lessons to be learned from that. Like, not everyone's going to be Fordham. Not everyone's going to get 6'9", 6'10". Like, it's hard to do that. Size of any talent level costs money in this market. But I go back and I think about that Fordham team that was clearly under-talented for their league, that was clearly under budget for their league, and still found a way to win a lot of games just by virtue of being big. And Dusty May talked a lot about, and remember this very vividly from Players Era. Dusty at Players Era told me and told the reporters in the room, like, one of the years we were great at Florida, we had a ton of size, and I didn't think we were doing anything special defensively. I didn't even think we had great defenders, but we were just kind of hard to play against and hard to score on. We were just big. Like, it was annoying to play us. And I remember thinking, like, if I was ever a high major head coach, that was what I wanted to be able to have. Was it just if we could build the size that like those that we had at that year at Florida, we'll probably be a good defense, even if we have our flaws. We'll probably be a pretty good team, even if we have our flaws. And I think Fordham is like the perfect operating example of like, if you do things like relatively coherently on both ends of the floor and you're big, you might be pretty good. You might be a lot better than people would expect you'll be.
I think too, even when you're talking about Magpie, like going back and looking about like some of the teams he had at UC Riverside, and just like seemed like every single year he had a Australian or New Zealand 6'11" guy, and one just like the evaluation to still get those guys at UC Riverside, like it just like goes back and sees like that guy like Lachlan Albrecht, who's like an NBA player, like at UC Riverside, which is just like crazy. I believe he went back to Australia before he went to the draft or whatever, but like, yeah. So even like to think about what he did there and seeing what he did in that league, which is having a lot of success in the Big West. And it's interesting too, because that was a league that has had some pretty good size at, and teams that played really bigger with like, or a lot bigger with like UC Santa Barbara and UC Irvine through the years. So it's interesting to see how some of that has translated. I think like you kind of said before, like, yeah, was Fordham pretty to watch? Like, no, but like they won, and like they lost some guys early who were supposed to be very important players. And for a team that, even from when you got that text, they lost some of their projected starters and still were able to be really good. And I think it's a story that, I don't think many people realize, just like those are not the coaching jobs that really get to the coach of the year type conversations. But like, I don't know how many people could have done that. And I think even too, going back to, like going back to some of his really good UC Riverside teams, like, that's one thing too, that like they did have some really good size, and just like it wasn't just like out there to be physical and out there to rebound. Like those advantages were leveraged in the way we kind of talked about. Like, and that's the thing too. If you're gonna have those big DHs out there, like you gotta bat them, like you gotta use them. And I feel like that's something that he really did, and that'll be again something to watch at that, like it's good. It's a good reminder about like what this, like it can look like that at different levels. As much as I did mention earlier, it's like, okay, well, like what do teams that aren't at the top of their leagues, do? Like, yeah, like Fordham's a really good counter to that, because they're in a very, very tough league and had a really good year given the circumstances using that style. And it's a good, as you were talking to, remember back to some of those UC Riverside teams that played a couple of bigs, and a lot of them, big physical Australian, New Zealand guys, and had a ton of success.
Right. And to be clear, I don't think this is as simple as like walk into a recruiting gym, find the first 5-7 footers who'll sign up and say, let's go to Fordham, baby, we're rolling. Like Mike Magpie is a really good evaluator, and he's a global evaluator. And I think he's done a phenomenal job. Let's be very, very clear about that. But I do think they are a good example, as you said, at Riverside and at Fordham. And I think there's emerging examples throughout the country of this, of like different unique ways that you can build a successful program with the principles. Like it, again, I think in this era, there is just a lot of talk of like, oh, Michigan bought their championship, or Florida bought their championship, or like, you can't expect to keep up with the Joneses. And I think my hope in this, and who knows, maybe we'll have a Fordham video on the channel by the time all is said and done. But like, my hope is to illustrate to the viewer that, like, at the end of the day, it's not just the elite of the elite that can take advantage of some of these lessons. And it's not as it certainly helps. I would love to have Florida's budget or Michigan's budget. If I was the GM, that would make life a lot easier. But it doesn't guarantee success, and you got to do it the right way. And these schools certainly have. So big picture, I do think we'll continue to see the growth of it. I think you see that in the portal. It's why these bigs are so expensive. I know Indiana just signed Gidgetoglu and Sherelle. That's like a serious kind of front court pairing. I'm sure we'll see more of it as we go. But I think that this is the new, if the 20 to 20 to 2020, if 2015 to 2020 or 2022 of college basketball was all about shooting and space and skill and Jay Wright, I think the 2024 to 2030 of college basketball will be defined by big ball and physicality and toughness and length. And it'll be fascinating to see what the next trend is. We'll be covering on Scout Team. So we appreciate you all watching. Any closing thoughts, Fawcett, before we head into the our next offseason episode?
No, I think it's or probably the last thing is just talking about how like the 4 is now seemingly like one of the most interesting positions at the college basketball level. Like, yes, there's been some discussion about like, are there less point guards than ever? And like, yes, everyone wants like size on the wings and versatile wings, NBA style guys. And even as much as when college basketball was trending smaller, everyone still liked at the 5 having size and some shot blocking. And it's just like, it seems like so many styles of play are kind of defined by what you do at the 4, whether it's the guy who can handle the ball a little bit, whether it's another center like we've talked about today, whether it's the stretch 4. And I do think, as I watched college basketball this year, and I am curious your thoughts. Like, I feel like the kind of true stretch 4 is kind of less valuable than ever. That's kind of one of my thoughts as well. It's also just an archetype you are seeing less of. But I mean, I still remember the time where anyone, like guys who just like didn't really rebound, didn't defend at a high level, but were 6'9" and could shoot 37% from 3. Those guys really sought after. I think that guy's just less valuable than ever. And it's not just like a market. I don't think it's a market inefficiency. I actually do think that style of player is just like was always overvalued when it was valued. And we still do see a couple of guys, those guys in the portals. I don't need to say names, but guys that I kind of feel are just kind of spot up shooting front court guys that don't help you enough defensively, don't help you enough rebounding wise, don't do enough else offensively. And that's kind of just my thought when I look at a lot of the top teams in the sport, and again at a lot of different levels. And I'm also just curious and that's something that you could also see at all the kinds of different levels, where I feel like a lot of teams have their guards, you can fill it up, maybe a center that's pretty good, and then it's like, okay, now let's like support them with the standstill stretch 4. And I don't know, I just feel like you can do things a lot more interesting by getting a guy who's maybe doesn't shoot it but is really physical and can play the mismatch game that way. Like, or if you have the ability to play multiple centers, like that's great. Or if you just like do play smaller and get more ball handling out there. It's just, I don't know, I just feel like maybe to me the stretch 4 is a bit of a dying breed. But I am curious in your thoughts quickly on that. Not that we need to drag on much longer.
It's a great question. I think you're probably right, but interestingly, I think shooting fives are like incredibly valuable and incredibly desired just because of like some of the optionality it opens up. Like 6'9", not super physical, just like elite shooting 4 is still not that valuable, but like just a capable shooter at the 5 that can like do all the other 5 stuff, like the Tomislava Visic's. Those guys, like, yeah, like give me my money, like I can't pay you fast enough. Like that guy is all over the place for the portal. So yeah, no, the archetypes is an interesting conversation and maybe a topic for another video. If you guys are interested in that, please do let us know. Yeah, we appreciate you all watching. Please subscribe to the channel. Check out my work over at Sports Illustrated. Fawcett's doing great stuff with Slapping Glass and lots of other places. He's a brilliant basketball mind. So we are fortunate to have him in the public sphere, and hope you all subscribe and enjoy. We'll see you all next week.